When I initially started my quest to cover all of the PlayStation 2 action games out there, in my first review I did for Gungrave, I mentioned how Red Entertainment was a studio that has made a bunch of cool games I eventually wanted to cover, one of those being Blood Will Tell. After playing it to near 100% completion, this game has only further cemented Red as one of my favorite and underrated studios of the era, making such unique and ambitious games with experimental ideas and cool presentation. It only makes me even sadder that we never got their Trigun game because it probably would have been sweet. In my mind, they were one of the premier studios to get for adapting an anime or a manga during the PlayStation 2 era. Yes, I'm aware that the Gungrave game came first before the anime, but they capture the aesthetics and overall game feel that you would want from an adaptation, like Yuke's Berserk game we've already covered. Sadly, we don't really get games like this, Garo, Berserk, and Samurai Champloo Sidetracked anymore. Bandai would rather shit out half-baked copy and paste arena fighters that are missing basic features and are already completely abandoned after being out for a week. For the unaware, Blood Will Tell is an adaptation of Osamu Tezuka's Dororo. I'm not sure why it's called Blood Will Tell in America, since in Japan they just kept the same name as the manga, but I assume Paul Marketing thought this was too Japanese for our feeble burger brains to not get confused by. I had actually read a bit of the manga before playing this game, since I loved watching Astro Boy with my dad growing up and wanted to see Tezuka's other works, so it was cool to see how they went adapting designs and panels into 3D. I really appreciate that while they went for very realistic proportions and aesthetics for the human characters, the demons did not lose their original flair. Part of the amazing presentation of this game is the illustrations by Blade of the Immortal author Hiroaki Samura. Things like the Wikipedia only list them as drawing the much better Japanese cover of this game, but a lot of the in-game stills shown in the opening hours look really similar to their art style. Some of the art might have been done by other artists at Red Entertainment, but regardless of who did what, it all looks incredible. The color and texture work are so vivid and vibrant. Even the opening cutscene from when you boot up the game that the inferior Western cover is a still image of looks fantastic even by today's standards. I can only imagine how this blew people away back in 2004. I also loved the cinematography for the in-game cutscenes, specifically how the demons moved within them. They have such a fun kinetic movement to them, similar to some of the stuff found in Garo. It feels purposefully reminiscent of Japanese theater with characters moving as if they were actors on wires. But the cutscenes and art aren't the only things that I love about this game's presentation. There are moments in gameplay like when you fight behind shoji door panels and all you can see is the silhouettes of your character and the enemies. The most impressive stuff is how they adapt the story of Dororo into gameplay. As always with these videos, expect spoilers, but if you want to find out what these things are for yourself, skip to this part of the video and play the game for yourself first. I think this game hosts a very unique experience that I haven't encountered anywhere else, and I would want people to see it for themselves first, going in completely blind. So the story of Dororo is about a young boy named Hyakimaru, who as a child was offered to the demons by his father for power. These demons would go and steal 48 body parts from baby Hyaki, and after his father saw what happened to his son, he was filled with regret for his actions. He then took his son and sent him down a river where he would eventually be found by a man named Jukai. Jukai was a physician who would then make a new body for the now deformed and abandoned Hyakimaru, allowing him to lead a relatively normal life. That was until demons started showing up around them and eventually told of his origins, being instructed to kill the 48 demons who stole his body or kill the human of their creation using his parts, thus beginning our journey of the 48 boss fight gauntlet. Because of the mystical prosthetics given to Hyakimaru, gameplay goes through many changes as you kill more and more demons and reclaim certain parts of your body. There are even pretty elaborate cutscenes for major organ regains. While not as graphic, they do remind me of the transformation scenes from the previously covered Altered Beast. Because Hyakimaru doesn't have eyes, using his third eye to see, the first 30 minutes or so of the game are in black and white until you kill the boss to reclaim your left eye. I think it's really funny that the game has to open with a prompt that says, No, there is nothing wrong with your TV, the game is supposed to be in black and white. This probably means that people were confused by this in focus testing if they did any of that, or at the very least feared people would be when they eventually played the game on release. Because Hyaki doesn't have any vocal cords and communicates telepathically until you beat the tutorial boss, his voice has this filter put on it for the first few lines of dialogue and combat barks.
I will take back all the 48 body parts the fiend stole from me.
Initially, I thought this was just a result of a shitty English dub, like the audio quality issues of Fatal Frame 3, where everyone sounded like they were speaking out of the finest soup can the recording team could find. When I realized this was an intentional thing, it got me really excited to see what else they could have up their sleeves for this game. On the topic of the dub, it's overall good, especially for the time. There are some goofy line deliveries, like when Hyaki gets his voice back.
I got my voice back!
But things like the narrations sound fantastic.
The 48 fiends have each taken a part of your body, young Hyakimaru. You must slay these fiends and retrieve what is rightfully yours.
It isn't until Hyakimaru reclaims his central nervous system does the game give you controller vibration. Yeah, the guy has no sense of touch, so how do we convey this to the player? We take away the one thing that interacts with the player in the physical world. It's such a creative approach to storytelling that only a game can accomplish. This didn't even cross my mind until I got it back and felt the controller shake for the first time. It took me by surprise the same way experiencing the sense of touch for the first time must have felt for Hyakimaru. You can thankfully turn it off if you want in the settings because controller vibrations suck 97% of the times in games, but I really cannot gush enough about how cool and creative this idea is. Whoever thought of this needs to be working with Kojima because who knows what those two could be cooking up if they were locked in a room together. Though, while these aspects are really cool and lend themselves to one of the most unique experiences I've had with an action game, there are sadly others that are actively bringing the gameplay down for large parts of this game. It isn't until you get one of your legs back at the end of Chapter 1 do you unlock the ability to sprint. Now, that may not sound that long, and maybe my playtime was longer than the average player because I'm going over all of the levels with a fine-tooth comb trying to find any secret that I can, but I reached the end of Chapter 1 3.5 hours into my playthrough. Part of this is because of the level design of this game, which pre-getting sprint is definitely adding time compared to after having it. The levels of Blood Will Tell are very similar to the Berserk PS2 game's levels, overly large wastelands that you have to trek through while fighting never-ending hordes of demons. Chapter 1 feels like one of the largest levels of this game, with only the final chapter feeling more absurdly big. So before you finish this chapter, you just have to slowly walk your way around from one end to the other. And the story is certainly going to be making you get your steps in for the day. Once you do get the sprint, traversal does become less daunting, especially when you have to backtrack, but at the end of the day, these maps do not need to be this big. The parallels and comparisons to the Berserk PS2 game don't stop with the unnecessary size of the levels, but also with how I found myself just running past enemy encounters after a while, because if I stopped to fight every single little enemy that spawned in, I felt like I was never making progress. The game really should have implemented a begin from this point style replaying of levels. There are so many save points that if you could just start from one of them or at least warp to them, it would cut down so much on pointless backtracking, instead of like it is now where you have to start from the very beginning of each chapter. So if you have to get to something at the very end of the map, then you have to go possibly miles. For the longest time before I went back and tested it on a fresh save, I also believed that the dodge was tied to getting the left leg too. This is not the case. You have it from the start, it's just that the game does not tell you about its existence at all. You have to be in strafe mode while holding down L1 and pressing X while pushing the left analog stick in any direction. Why the game does not mention this in its tutorial or menus is beyond me and actively changes my perception of the game. It turns out that they do mention this in the manual for this game, but seeing as it has now become a $400 game for some reason, so unless you hunt down the PDF on the Internet Archive, you aren't going to know this going into it without prior information of its existence. Originally, I was going to complain about how this hurts boss fights because before you would have the dodge, you could only run around them, making the fights feel reminiscent of the Berserk Muso game, rubbing your stick on the leg of a boss until they eventually fall over while not reacting to you at all beforehand. There is also no block or parry to my knowledge, so this also adds to the disconnect when fighting killing a lot of bosses. It also hurts the scripted segments where you are fighting humans and must perform non-lethal combat. This involves strafing your opponents and hitting them on the back with the dull end of your sword so you can deal massive damage and knock them out. The lack of a block or a parry when you can be fighting 20 dudes at the same time easily results in you getting stun locked to death. The camera for this game is the same as a few of the games we've covered previously, like Gungrave Overdose, where you move the camera with the right stick for slow, awkward panning before it snaps right back into place behind the player character when you let go. Like with Altered Beast, you're mainly going to be recentering the camera by tapping L1. Because of this camera's implementation, it makes the platforming in this game be really annoying. Thankfully, these segments are few and far between, but I always felt that I never had good depth perception when having to do some of these jumps. The last complaint that I have before I want to start talking about the combat of this game is some of its lack of clarity at times. So as we've already gone over, the main objective is to kill the 48 demons, meaning we have 48 boss fights, though it's not actually mandatory to do this. Obviously, you should do this because otherwise you don't get the true ending and aren't at your strongest, but the only mandatory ones that you must fight are the bosses on the path of the main story. It's usually 2 or 3 for each of the 7 main chapters. The rest are all optional, with a bunch only encountered on replaying levels and backtracking. Thankfully, replaying levels just dumps you into the sandbox of said chapter and does not make you redo any story objectives. The issues start when it feels like a total crapshoot to get some of these demons to spawn. Some are pretty obvious, like you see this ledge that you can jump from with a pressure plate that you could press down like the one you did earlier. When you see that it does not react to you standing on it normally, you can put 2 and 2 together. But then there are others like the Forest of Chapter 6 where you have to destroy these specific statues. This is 100% where Itsuno got the idea for that shitty Forest of Illusion or whatever the hell it was called in DMC4. It's the same maze that requires a guide for the first time you go through because I'm too stupid and every room looks the exact same. There are also ones that only spawn in previous levels after you get to a certain point in the story, either because you have a new upgrade like getting the cannon's damage increase so you can break the boulders blocking the combat arenas in Chapter 1 and 2, or because a story beat has happened. Without looking up a guide to tell you, hey, come back here after beating Chapter 6, you can easily think that you are missing something about the level that is preventing you from getting in there. The main menu is just saying that there is X number of demons remaining in the level, so this all could have been avoided if it just had any sort of signposting to come back later that is more clear, because it kinda has it with certain lines, but it can easily be interpreted as, oh, there must be something in the level that I could find to do this. The other part that adds to the confusion for me was that Dororo has this mode where you can send them for scouting, and they'll be able to sniff out demons and hidden stuff. Every time I'd replay the first level to find the final demon in it, I would get this line from Dororo.
Something's not right.
While going up these giant steps. I think they're referring to this hidden part you could jump up to, but I found that in my first time through the level, so I feel like it shouldn't have kept playing over and over again even when I jumped to it. This caused me to think I am missing something and just had to rub my character against every wall while mashing the interaction button, or swinging my sword against every wall in the off chance that there is an illusionary wall or some sort of hidden path. The combat manages to hit a nice sweet spot on both the mechanical depth and the is it just fun to play spectrums. No, it's not as deep as anything out of Capcom from this era, but it also is not completely mindless as Space Sheriff Spirits or 7 Samurai 20XX. It's slightly above things like the Sword of Etheria and Nano Breaker with a decent amount of combos and decent yet simple feeling air combat. Yakimaru has 2 stances that you can swap between at any time by hitting L2. You have the single long katana, which starts out rather slow and lacking at first, but as you play more of the game and it levels up from using it, along with finding any of the hidden swords scattered throughout the levels that have different properties, this stance actually becomes the more fun of the 2. It becomes much more useful later in the game too because of its longer range, which makes dealing with the spear enemies much easier. The second stance is the one that sets this game apart style-wise from a lot of the others on the market at the time. Hyaki shoots off both of his prosthetic arms to reveal swords underneath them, giving you a fast but short-range style of combat. Combos with this stance look so cool as you start doing 360 spins in the air and mid-air somersaults that look like he was taking notes from Sonic's Spin Dash. This stance also gives you a gun, which is very useful versus some of the flying enemies or enemies with annoying hitboxes like the fire wheels. I don't know what it is about this enemy archetype, but they are so frustrating to fight in every game they are present in. They're so annoying in this game when you have to play as Dororo and your punches are so short range. It just feels like bullshit trying to fight them. Your other ranged projectile is your leg cannon, which I mentioned earlier. This functions like Guts' arm cannon, where it's a great way to deal big damage at a distance or clear out bundles of enemies that would otherwise stun lock you if you tried to face them head on. Unlike Guts' arm cannon, this has an ammo count rather than being on a meter. When the meter under your health bar is full and glowing, you can hit square and triangle at the same time to do a super move. You start out with this massive spinning AoE attack that gives you invincibility frames, which is good for dealing huge damage to bosses while dodging some of their bullshit attacks and grapples, but also with dealing with large hordes of enemies. Hidden throughout the game are these scrolls you can pick up which give you other super moves, so definitely make sure to break environmental objects whenever you see them, because you never know which one is going to be hiding an incredibly strong game-changing super move. The last thing in your arsenal is holding down triangle until the sword explodes with a shimmer and stabs an enemy, initiating a QTE sequence. The more prompts you successfully do in the time limit and hit triangle again will give you both this super stylish looking execution screen, along with giving you much needed rewards like health items, ammo, and these green little orbs, which if you collect 100 of will give you a 1-up. If you mess this up at any point, the sequence will end and you will get no rewards, but there is nothing stopping you from just doing it again as long as the enemy didn't die and you don't get hit by any of the other enemies around you. I don't know what it is about this QTE, but my brain is just not wired to be able to competently do this to get this above 16 button presses successfully. It's simply too hard for me, and boy, is that going to come and bite me in the ass later. As I mentioned earlier, there are segments in this game where you get to play as Dororo. Think of these as the Clank segments from Ratchet & Clank 1 and 2. Most of these remind me of the jail sequence from 2 because like Clank, Dororo is sneaking through tight areas that Hyakimaru would otherwise be unable to get through. Their combat is better than most of these type of playable buddy character segments. Dororo's uppercut is cleaner than some Street Fighter characters, though like I already complained about with the fire wheel enemies, your range is lacking for some enemy teams, feeling bullshit to fight and not designed for Dororo at all. You do have the ability to throw items, but most of these either suck or should be saved for scripted sequences. The only thing that you should know if you plan to play this game after watching this video is that during the Dororo segment in the prison, make sure to reload the save if you do not open one of the doors with the sword behind it. It is the only time you are able to acquire this sword. If you try to return back to this area later, you simply cannot get it. It is one of the few, if the only one that I'm aware of, that is a timed event in this game. This special sword is one of the 2 that I feel like is mandatory if you want to fight the true final boss and not have a hard time. If you end up missing this one, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world because there's always the second one you can get, which we'll bring up later. The reason I say this is because the true final boss can be a real ballbuster. I knew going into this playthrough to expect the worst because when I was making the backlog list of all the games I plan to cover for this series so viewers can play along, the top review for this game at the time mentioned how this was one of the worst bosses in the genre, and it certainly has all of the qualities to be agonizing like the Altered Beast final boss, since they are both multi-phase gauntlets with no checkpoints, absurd damage, and the worst camera in the game, but there are a few things you can do to mitigate potential headaches. I was stuck on this boss fight for a while and was only really able to beat it because I consulted this game facts guide and watched this one boss rush video on YouTube to see how people were actually combating this thing. Before going into this boss fight, I think it's imperative to make sure that you have as many 1-ups and cannon ammo as you can get before going into this fight, because you will likely need them simply because there is a lot of unavoidable damage and the camera isn't the best during this fight. Those blue projectiles that the boss shoots at you in the first phase, if broken before they hit you, will drop cannon ammo. The stone pillars in the area can be broken and contain healing items, but the boss's large swings often break them and cause the items to time out and despawn before you ever need them, or even realize this happens, since it's off screen and the boss camera mode keeps your view centered on the beast. During the second phase, go to the right and try to be parallel with the fingertip of the top right arm. This was roughly the sweet spot where I was able to consistently be able to swat the sweeping arm back without taking any damage. It's not easy and it's going to take some time to get the timing down, so do some trial and error in this segment of the arena and hope for the best. You are probably going to want to turn off the boss camera during parts of the third segment where it is just shooting this beam forward so you can get a better path towards the tail, and make sure to use the super move right before it grabs you, or else it will throw you into that beam for guaranteed damage. For this segment, it is probably best to switch to a sword, which might do less damage than your best sword, but builds super meter much faster. That way you can get multiple supers off on a single attempt on the beast's back. The final segment is easily the worst one and almost made it so I could not beat this game. This phase starts by the boss flying from outside of the arena directly at you, and you must do the triangle charge stab correctly and then do a combo in a rhythm where you aren't too slow but aren't too fast, since each hit pushes the boss's head back, meaning that you can miss if you go too fast. It's very frustrating and difficult to time both parts of this because you have this terrible depth perception with the forced camera from the boss camera mode, which you cannot turn off here for some reason. The only instance of this in the entire game, by the way. Once you successfully do this, its heart pops out, which is holding Dororo hostage. You then must do the QTE attack you've been doing all game for a super cool, thematically pleasing 48 slashes, representing the 48 demons you have killed. Now you may remember what I said earlier, that I am terrible at this and struggle to get above 16 successful hits. To kill the final boss, you must do a 48 button QTE sequence with 0 mistakes and no assistance. I simply could not do this normally, and it is why I said to not miss the Sword of the Twin Clouds when playing as Dororo in the prison. I sadly did, because I did not consult a guide until I was stuck on the true final boss and had no way to get it. I don't know what this sword does, but I assume it might skip the QTE based on the item description included in said guide. Thankfully, the second sword is just sitting in the final boss room of the previous chapter before unlocking the true ending. This does mean you have to run through the largest map in the game, which can take easily at least 15 to 20 minutes without even fighting any in every enemy you encounter. The blade you get here, the Sword of the Eighth Cloud, is the only reason I was able to beat this boss, because not only does it slow the QTE down, which I still managed to screw up somehow, but it saves your place in the QTE, so if you redo the Bull Rush segment without dying, you can just pick up where you left off, which is what I did. I got up to 21 slashes the first time and then got the remaining slashes the second time to finally beat the game after struggling on this boss for hours. I'd say that Altered Beast, Shinobi, and Nano Breaker still have more annoying enemies based on what we've covered so far, but without the easy mode sword and figuring out how to abuse some of the jank of this game, it would be right up there with those three. Once you beat the game, you unlock Dororo mode, which is a time trial segment where you can play through repurposed main story levels trying to get collectibles before the timer runs out. I did not find it all that enjoyable, but it's cool that it's there to begin with, and it does allow you to unlock some really nice concept art. Blood Will Tell is easily one of the best PS2 action games we've covered so far. It's one of the few that ends with me not wanting to snap the disc in half and never touching it again. It could have easily gotten to that point if there weren't the buffers for the annoying final boss, but its combat is fun and addictive, and the presentation is some of the coolest on the console. It's a shame that this game is now going for like 400 plus USD for some reason, despite the fact that people have said, yeah, I picked that shit up in a bargain bin for $5 years ago. I'd love to add it to my collection, and even saw it once recently out in the wild, but unless I start making Mr. Beast levels of money instead of barely covering my rent for some months, I don't think I could ever justify that purchase. There's no game out there that's worth this much money. I'd love to see a re-release for this game, and highly recommend everyone to go out and play it for yourself on an emulator or a modded PlayStation 2. This is one that you do not want to miss out on. If you've made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks for watching as always. If you really like the video, please leave a like and comment and pass the video around. If you really like these videos and the channel, maybe consider becoming a patron on Patreon. It is the best way to support me directly, with multiple tiers, including a $3 voting tier, allowing patrons to pick what is the next upcoming multi-game review, which right now the vote is between Jak and Daxter and Metroid Prime. The poll actually finished before the video was done, and both series is tied, so I decided that I'll probably just do both. I haven't decided which order I'm going to do them in. I might do Metroid Prime first, since I have Metroid Prime 1 almost finished, but maybe I'll do the Jak games because those are shorter. I also have a $7 tier that allows you to view rough cuts of upcoming videos. Some of those currently include my eventual Drakengard retrospective. I'm now going to shout out all of my $5 and up patrons who really help support the channel. Neutral Guy, Speedo Weedo Wagon, Metal Cactus, Andy F, Bully, Applejuice426, Densha, Turbo Chicken, Scary Dinosaurs, Barely, Elliot Morton, Fish Kami, Jordan Bennett, Kevin Velasquez, Kohai Carmen, Lotto, Medi Not the Bad Guy, MGS Duh, Quaner, Quartz, Samuel Egan, Sayin Heggy, Slemf Tingle, Friday Fragmaster, Rovit, Ben Johnson, Buckets, Chichometrius, Cursed Void, Ek Frazo, Filthy Fingers 69, Hardleg Joe, Jacob Hamilton, Lazy Titan, Leon, Nicholas Pedinato, Pitor Bersky, Sean, Cisagy, Sir Newt, and Michael. Thanks so much, guys. If you're a card game player of any kind, I have a TCG Player affiliate link in the description below. All purchases you make using my link will give me a small kickback. I also have a NordVPN affiliate link, so any plans that you get using my link will also help support the channel. As for what's coming out next, I think I'm going to mainly focus on shorter videos. I don't know, I think something's just broken inside of me. I haven't been able to focus and sit down and work on a long video without feeling like I'm going to die and have some sort of mental breakdown, which is why the Drakengard retrospective isn't done. There has been a bunch of games that have come out recently that I'm interested in covering, so maybe I'll do some short videos or maybe I'll do another backlogged monologue. I still have a few PS2 action game videos in the works, like The Sword of Destiny, so look forward to that if you're interested. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time.